Hey everyone, welcome back to the Peak Archery Podcast. This episode is the start of a series on the mental game with Coach Larry Wise and myself. This is Mental Game 101, the beginning of the fundamentals. If you want to watch this podcast in its full entirety, click on the link in the comment or in the information about the podcast to join Patreon. The full episode is located there. You're still getting some really good content. You're just not getting the whole thing. There's a lot more involved. If you want to check that out, join there. I often go live on Instagram and stuff like that, so you can catch some of it there as well. But this is a super informative series, and I highly recommend you hopping in and getting on board to up your mental game. Thanks for following Peak Archery Podcast. 12 topics about mental game?
Yes.
Larry?
Yes.
That's a lot of mental game discussion. That might
make
my brain tired.
That scratches the surface. It gets us through the basics.
Well,
that's where we have to start.
Yeah. Right.
So, I've named this first, I guess the first title here is Peak Mental Game 101.
Gotcha. Well, I guess we'll officially get started. And I'll just say that welcome back to the Peak Archery Podcast. This is the start of a series, we're going to call it.
Right.
Coach Wise. And I will say that this is all about the mental game. The next few episodes are going to be mental game related. Larry has this amazing book, like Planning to Peak in Archery.
Planning to Peak.
It's right here. It's right here. It's right here. It's right here. Look, Planning to Peak in Archery.
Yep.
And we're taking snippets and Larry's sharing his wise words, pun intended, through this series. And this specific one is all about the fundamentals, right? Is that what we discussed?
Well, yes, this is Peak Mental Game 101.
Peak Mental Game 101. Okay.
And so we have to define, and we're big on definition so people understand the terms we're using, but we have to define the basic principle, the fundamental principle of the mental game. And there is a fundamental principle.
Sure.
And we're going to lay that out in this first podcast, 101, of this educational series. So what is this principle? What does it revolve around? Okay, so that's the purpose. And like I said, I have a list of 12 topics that we can do given enough time. So, ready to get started?
Yeah, let's do it.
And said what to you?
He said, great job, man. Like, way to get it done. And I reciprocated, man. We're not in that position if it's not for 8, if it's not for Mark Andrews, it's not for KD, it's not that for all those guys blocking, just to get us in position to win the game like that. So, you got to give credit where it's due. This is a team win against a tough opponent that we're going to see again. And then I'm sure we'll see them, through January and February, but we love our battles with these guys, but again, great team win.
Speaking of love, do you love it when it comes down to you?
I mean, I love it and I hate it and everything in between. It's I'd be lying to you if I said every time I go out there I'm not just a little bit nervous. I'm not thinking about worst case scenario, but it's really important to me and to us to take, those 1.3 seconds between the snap, the hold, and the kick, and just focus on the nuts and bolts of what's going to make the kick. And my feelings don't matter. What matters is seeing the ball snapped with 12 o'clock laces from Nick Moore, seeing the ball spotted cleanly from Jordan Stout, his first career game-winning hold. And then from there, I'm just assistant kicker. The ball kicks itself at that point. And all we're really thinking about is those things that are going to make the kick. All the feelings and stuff, we can enjoy them them after the fact.
And the missed kicks in pregame, 6 out of 19, not an issue.
Well, it's a good thing they don't keep stats for pregame warm-ups.
Exactly.
You know, I mean, this is a tough place to kick. You know, whether there's wind in the stadium or we got fresh sod or whatever it may be. So pregame warm-ups, it just is what it is.
Awesome. Congratulations.
Thank you.
All right.
Good stuff. It's good
Yeah,
stuff.
that
Forget your
is-
feelings.
Yeah. After that first 30 seconds, he then tells you the heart of the mental game and where his conscious focus is. And we're going to get back to that later in this little podcast here.
Sure.
So what I want to do now is do a little PowerPoint presentation.
Yep.
So I've got
Share away, my friend. Share away.
I've got to. Well, I got to pull that up first, don't I? Okay. Oh. Now I lost my screen. Okay, now I think I can share.
Go ahead, share it. Get it to come up.
Is that up?
Yes, sir. You're good to go.
Okay. From the beginning?
Yep.
Showing up good?
Looks good. That's a beautiful color, by the way.
Okay. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Got
The
it.
fundamental principle of the archery mental game. You can take out the word archery too if you want. Okay. The mental game. Pretty much the same across activities, whether it's sports or other applications. And I'd like to begin with how most people see the mental game. They see it as a mystery, and a mountain too high to climb. And so, they don't realize how simple it is. Not simple to do, but simple to understand. And there is a path to building a good mental game for yourself. So it's not a mountain too high to climb. And incidentally, I took this picture in the Alps in August. Beautiful place, beautiful lake.
It ironically looks a lot like the Peak Archery Podcast logo.
Yeah. Okay. So if you want a better mental game, then we have to read this, think about it. So if you want something you've never had, you're going to have to do something you've never done. You're going to have to change some habits. That's called learning. And you will have to learn and apply some new skills, which you can do. All right. And throughout this series, we'll give you skills that you can do to improve your mental game. Okay. So there are a lot of areas to build skills in for the mental game. Setting goals, your shooting form practice, on and on, breathing control, focus shifting. There's a really big one that we've got to discuss and build some skills for. Here's other mental skills. These are all mental skills, and this isn't all of them. This is some of them, and some important ones, and some basic ones that we can build skills and get you going with a better mental game. So let's get to the heart of the mental game. And this question is at the heart of it, at the center. So I took this picture while I was judging the Classic a few years back. And Mr. Marlowe here, Jacob, is in a moment of high personal value, right? He was in the process of shooting winning shots because he won the Classic that year. So, the fundamental question right now for you, when you are standing at full draw in the midst of aiming a scoring arrow, any scoring arrow, okay, what is your objective? In other words, to what are you assigning your conscious attention right now in this instant? So what is Jacob assigning his conscious focus to right now? All right. Interesting question. Okay. Most people, and you know this, Frank, from having worked with, well, with different classes I've taught and seminars that we've done and so on.
Yeah.
Most people are thinking, well, I got to shoot a 10 or an X. You know, at the Classic, I got to shoot an 11.
Yeah.
All right. That's on their mind while they're at full draw aiming a scoring arrow. Got to have an 11, got to shoot 11. Or some people are, well, I got to shoot a 33 this end. And that's always interesting because you can't put 3 arrows on your string at one time. You know, you can't shoot a 33. You know, you only got 1 arrow. So that gets us thinking here. If you're thinking score or the result, then we have to know that the score occurs after the arrow leaves the bowstring and hits the target, you know, and that's after it left the bowstring. And so I ask my students, everyone, so after the arrow leaves the bowstring, how much control do you have over it? Answer: none, 0, right? And so stuff happens on the way to a target, particularly outdoors, right? You know, wind, rain, on and on and on. That bird that flies through the air and commits suicide on the end of your arrow. Okay, so you have no control over that. And so the answer is none. So that gets us thinking that, you know, if I'm thinking about score, I'm not thinking right. That's not helping me. Okay, so thinking in the future cannot contribute to how you make this shot. It cannot contribute to that. So if you're thinking in the present, not in the future, and not in the past about the arrow you missed the last end, okay, but in the present, you have a better chance of making this shot, right? Of having a good result. Okay. Further, if you're thinking in the present about the process you use to make this shot, well, that is the best thing you can do to contribute to the quality of the shot. So be engaged in the present on the process. So that brings up the question then, what is your process for causing the release of this arrow, for bringing about the release of this arrow? And it's different. Frank, you know, is shooting barebow.
Oh, yeah.
It's different than shooting recurve.
Extremely different.
And that's different than shooting a compound bow with the release aid. It's different for Justin Tucker, who's standing in his ready position, wanting to kick the ball. His process is different, but we all have a process. And we need to be thinking about that in the process. And that is, what are you thinking about, and do you have control over that? So our process, we have control over. All right. So I would encourage everybody right now, every listener here, write that on paper. Can you write that? Can you describe that process? Several weeks ago, I was working with a 20-year-old college student, and I asked him this question. And he described very accurately for me what his process. Now, he's a bowler.
Yeah.
And I know his father. And so I got to meet him. He was struggling with his mental game and not finishing well in his tournaments. You know, in the 3 games he had to roll, each game got worse. Well, so we worked on that. But he could describe his process very accurately. And I was really impressed with that. Not many can describe that. So what is your recurve process? Yeah. Well, how would you describe yours for Barebow, Frank?
Man, this is a long description.
Yeah.
I'll tell you this. There's since working with you on the mind manage and body feel stuff, I've gotten very good at what parts of the entire process I can use body feel and what specific parts are crucial for me to stay in the mind managed part.
Yeah. So
Because
just at the very end.
yeah. So you want me to go from like anchor to the end?
Yeah, after you've anchored.
So after I've anchored, I try to actually stay in the mind manage part of my brain, and I really pay attention to. Let me interject before anchor. I actually draw back in a line that my index finger touches the front of my chin, and then I come straight up into my anchor this way. Corner of my currently corner of my mouth. For outdoors, that changes. Once I get to that anchor, I think about the tension that's on my fingers, because in Barebow we shoot 3 under, and these 2 fingers have to be as close to the same tension for me as possible, because that squares the string and it makes it easier for that release to happen. Okay.
Yeah.
Once I verify that tension feels the same, my focus stays in the middle of the target, but I have to go right to the middle of the target with the point and continue to focus on keeping that tension on my fingers. I don't really think about my back or anything like that, but I have to keep myself in that, and I call it mind manage. I have to keep myself in that state of mind so that I can put it in the middle and I can leave it in the middle.
Yeah. So visually, the point is in the middle.
Visually, the point goes to the middle. I try not to look at it at all. I have to go anchor, verify. I verify my anchor, verify my string blur, and it's a passive verification. It's not super hard.
No,
And then
check off things.
Yep, it's a checkoff thing. And then the next checkoff, which is one of the hardest ones, is just point to the middle. So I'm staring at the middle, and I bring my bow arm up just that little tiny bit. I put the point of the arrow in the middle, and I leave it there. Try not to hold it still, but I try to let it settle as long and for as long as possible in the middle of the target.
Yeah.
I don't think about letting go. I actually just think about holding, because
so that gets to the really important part of the holding.
Yeah.
Which
is the hardest part in Barebow. That's the target panic. Like, we face target panic head on.
So you have all these checkoff stuff, and that gets you into your holding finally at the end. And you have then an internal triggering feel that signals to release.
Correct. I would say that's, yes, it is an internal feel that allows the release to happen. So I approach each arrow with the idea that I'm not letting it go.
Yeah.
But I've trained my release so hey, you're watching the podcast, but you don't get to see the full version because you're not on Patreon. There's exclusive content, coaching stuff. Everything is on the Patreon page. So listen, if you want to listen to the rest of this podcast, get everything in this presentation from Coach Larry Wise, click on Patreon, go join up, and we will, see you there. All right. Thanks for your support and checking out and listening to Peak Archery Podcast.